600 years ago, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote, "The life so short, the craft so long to learn." Today, few people invest time in learning crafts that are no longer necessary. Take canoes. Trendy sportsman stores offer them in various sizes and colors, and they can be possessed in the time it takes to sign a visa form. But it wasn't always so. In a small community tucked away in Columbus County, they made canoes the old-fashioned way. Crusoe Island residents crafted watercraft that were perfectly adapted to the green swamp. Native Americans learned the skill first, but in 1804, a group settled there and refined the old methods. The settlers, believed to be French refugees from Haiti, have for the most part lived in seclusion on Crusoe Island ever since, rarely sharing stories or making friends with anyone from the outside world. There are many theories about where these mysterious settlers came from, although even the latest scholarship is still inconclusive. This glimpse into their culture and one of their many unusual skills is offered to you through Cape Fear Museum, dedicated to the preservation of things that make southeastern North Carolina unique.
The marsh is a flooded meadow, and a swamp is a flooded forest. And look at the map, shows that all of the streams flow out of the green swamp. This swamp is higher than the surrounding territory. It's a swamp on a hill. The Native Americans call the swamp on a hill a Pocosin. The green swamp is a Pocosin. Originally, it contained approximately 900 square miles. It was bounded roughly by what is now US 17 on the east and south, and US 74-76 on the north, and the Waccamaw River on the west. It contains Lake Waccamaw, the largest of the Carolina bays. These are depressions in the coastal plain. They are oriented in a northwest to southeast direction with a rim of sand on the southeast end. Their origin is unknown, but some people believe they were made by a meteorite shower. The Waccamaw Indians inhabited the Lake Waccamaw area. They made canoes by hollowing out tree trunks using fire and stone tools. The white settlers made similar log canoes from the giant bald cypress trees. Only the heartwood was used because of its durability and resistance to rot. These canoes were and still are called dugouts. The wood was dug out of the inside using an axe, a foot adze, and a howl. A howl is an adze with a slightly curved blade and a short handle. It's a one-handed tool. With its smooth inside, curved surfaces are produced. The dugouts made by the white men were narrow and therefore fast. They could also pass easily between trees which grow close together in the swamp. They were almost soundless. They were designed to be paddled by one man. However, they could also carry a deer and a good load of liquor. They became the workboats of the flooded forest, the lowland swamps. This is Tommy Spivey. Tommy is one of the few remaining people that know how to make a dugout. When they were filming Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, there was nobody in the state of Louisiana that knew how to make one, so they had to come up to the green swamp, and Tommy made those dugout canoes that you see in the movie. The need for such a canoe has decreased over the years, and the skill and know-how required to build one has nearly been lost. Also, very few large trees large enough for a dugout are still available. However, there's a settlement on a sand ridge which runs along the edge of the Waccamaw River. It is called Crusoe Island. Here, a few men still know how to make a dugout. Whether the skills will be passed on to future generations is problematical. In order to preserve this know-how, I asked Tommy Spivey to build one and explain each step in the operation while I photographed it. There was another and personal reason for my wishing to have a dugout made to give to the New Hanover County Museum. Just after the turn of the century, my father, Charles Raymond Humphreys, was employed by the Waccamaw Lumber Company as a consulting civil engineer. The company owned the Great Green Swamp. The inhabitants of Crusoe Island had been living there without benefits of legal title to the land. However, they could claim ownership by squatters' rights. My father went to the island and explained this to the inhabitants, and further that he would survey each piece to establish the boundaries and then have the claims registered in the land office in Whiteville, the county seat. This would prevent any controversy between them and the lumber company. Friendships were established, and when the work was completed several years later, the inhabitants took up a collection to buy my father a pistol as a token of their appreciation. One man, maybe Buck Lewis, paddled a dugout 10 miles up the Waccamaw River and then across the lake to Wanonish, where he got a ride to Wilmington, purchased the pistol, and returned. I wanted to present the pistol and the dugout to the museum as part of the history of southeastern North Carolina. Now, this slide shows a 130-year-old cypress tree, which was donated by Dr. James Smith to make the dugout. W.J. Hodder, Jim, marked out the spot on which the tree was to be felled. He then cut a notch on that side of the tree and, using a chainsaw and hardwood wedges, dropped it perfectly. Getting the log out of the river swamp proved to be quite a problem, but eventually the canoe log was delivered to Tommy Spivey at Crusoe Island. Tommy looked over the log carefully and turned it in such a way that a small crack would not affect the canoe. Then the top was flattened with an axe to permit the application of a chalk line. From that, a perpendicular chalk line was dropped at each end. A sharp-pointed stick was tacked to one end with the edge following the chalk line. At the other end, a similar stick with a V cut in the top was held and sighted through to determine that the three lines were in the same plane. Cutting along these lines would split the log lengthwise into two equal halves. Here Tommy is measuring the width of the available heartwood. This determines the maximum width of the dugout. Note how Tommy aligns the log so that the splitting line falls along the crack in the log. With a chainsaw, Tommy cuts down into the log and goes from one end to the other. And he advised for no one else to ever try this because he'd lose a leg probably. Then the log was rolled over with a cant hook or peavy and the longitudinal cut made from the other side to meet the one already made. With a light tap with the axe, the two halves are separated, enough material for two dugouts. The heartwood is measured along the flat surface of one half of the log. Its width determines the maximum outside width of the dugout. A chalk line is snapped down the middle, and a line perpendicular to this is made 3 feet from each end. From the 4 spots where these two lines leave the heartwood, 2 chalk lines are drawn to outline the outside of the dugout. At each end, a nail is driven 1 inch from the center line, and a chalk line snapped from each point to the intersection of the 3-foot line and the outside lines. The point for each end of the dugout is created by cutting out the excess from both sides. The sapwood is removed from the sides by perpendicular cuts with a chainsaw. This shows the sapwood removed all the way around. Following this, nails are driven 1 inch inside around the top and chalk lines are applied. Then a cut was made straight down with the end of the chainsaw along this line to a depth of about 4 inches. This outlines the gunwale. Shallow cross cuts are then made inside, and these pieces dug out with a foot adze. Near the end, an axe is used to hew out the wood. Care is taken not to split the sides here where the grain runs out. More shallow cuts are made, followed by more axe hewing. The log is then turned over, and cross cuts are made down to the heartwood so the bottom can be hewed flat. The sapwood is then split off the bottom. Chalk lines are then laid out for the bottom, which is flat and 22 inches wide. The bottom ends are then cut out. The shape of the bottom is then cut out by slabbing off thin sections with the chainsaw. The spring in the bottom, both bow and stern, is then laid out. This is done by driving a nail at each end 5 inches down from the top. A line is then drawn from there to the bottom 3 feet from each end. This determines the angle at which the bow and stem rises from the keel. Cross cuts are then made to the spring lines, bow and stern, with a howl, and is used to remove the excess wood. All remaining sapwood on the bottom is removed with an axe and adze. A howl is used to shape the ends on the bottom. Final trimming off of sapwood from the bottom is done with a chainsaw. The dugout is now turned right side up, and the spring, 2 inches from the midsips to each end, is laid out with a chalk line. A line is run from the bow to stern, and the width measured at the 3-foot marks to make sure the boat is symmetrical. It must be the same distance from the line on each gunwale. Top spring lines are then sawed out. The gunwale is then deepened with a chainsaw. This is done very carefully. A false move here and the dugout is ruined. Cross digging is now done with the foot adze and howl. This slide shows the digging well advanced, and here are the foot adze and howl which were used. Next, the dugout is turned over, and any final shaping of the outside is done. Then holes are drilled for the gauge pins. These pins are 1 inch long, used for the bottom, and 1 1/4 inches long for the chine. The chine is the thick part where the sides join the bottom. These pins are made of the heartwood that was dug out of the inside of the boat. They are whittled a little oversized and driven in for a snug fit. As the wood is the same as that of the dugout, it swells and shrinks to the same amount and never gets loose. These pins are hammered in flush with the outside. 12 pins total are put in, 1 line of 4 down the keel, and 1 line in the chine on each side. Then the boat is turned over and digging is completed down to the top of the gauge pin. This results in the proper thickness in the proper places. Then a paddle is whittled out and a seat cut from the bottom. Both of these are made from heart cypress. The seat fits about 2 inches off the bottom and can be slid forward and aft to any position the paddler wishes. He sits cross-legged. Sometimes backrests are used. A small cap is fitted over the bow and stern. Here is Tommy Spivey looking over his handiwork. Final dimensions, 11 feet, 11 3/4 inches long, 22 inches wide, and 9 inches deep. And here is the finished dugout floating. Note it is perfectly balanced, demonstrating how uniform the thickness has been maintained.
Crusoe Island Canoes, The gondolas of the Green Swamp are increasingly rare artifacts. Individuals like the late Tommy Spivey are even more rare. Cape Fear Museum salutes Buster Humphreys, a volunteer researcher who recognized the need to celebrate both.